Okay, this is Mr. K going through the formative assessment gas exchange for biology grade 9 or IG1. The first question should be answer C. The reason being it's not going to be A or B because carbon dioxide and oxygen, they're still mixed within the air, and the air still has free passage through the windpipe or the trachea, regardless of whether the cilia are damaged. So it's not A or B, and if the cilia are damaged, so here's a cilia cell, they have less of an ability to move the mucus along. So the mucus layers like this. If these are damaged, the mucus layer just stays put. Now, if the mucus layer stays put, then more mucus can't be removed out of the lungs. So just to clarify, when the cilia are damaged, they can't move the mucus effectively. And that only leaves answer C, which is more bacteria will enter the lungs. And the reason for that is the question is talking about the cilia on the trachea. So if they're damaged, then bacteria are able to get all the way past the windpipe and into the lungs. If they're not damaged, some of the bacteria will get trapped within the windpipe and won't even get to the lungs at all. Of course, even undamaged cilia in a windpipe, there will still be some bacteria which get into the lungs. However, the cilia which are effective will be able to remove them via the mucus. So the answer should be C, more bacteria will enter the lungs because the cilia in the trachea aren't working properly. They're not moving the mucus away and out towards the throat. Question number 3. The answer should be C, and the reason for this is after 5 minutes of vigorous exercise, the depth of breathing will increase and the rate of breathing will increase. So what that means is we're looking for it to speed up and we're looking for it to get bigger. Okay, so depth of breathing corresponds to the size, so a bigger trough and peak, and the rate corresponds to faster. So analysing the graphs, if you were to count the peaks on the given question, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is just part of 1. So we've got 8 peaks. Now in question A, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. So this is an increase in rate. However, the depth is still the same, because this has not got bigger. Okay, so it's not A. For B, we can see that the depth has increased, but we've now only got 1, 2, 3, possibly 4 peaks, so the rate has decreased. So that means they're breathing deeper, but they're breathing slower, and so it wouldn't be that one. After exercise, you're going to be out of breath. And D, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this was a common mistake. The depth has increased, but the rate has stayed the same because we've still got 8 peaks. Whereas C, we've got an increase in the depth or the volume and an increase in the rate. So the answer would be C. Moving on, definition for diffusion is the movement of particles from a high concentration to a low concentration down the concentration gradient. State what causes oxygen to diffuse into the blood from the alveoli. Well, the alveoli have a high concentration of O2. The blood has a low concentration of O2, so diffusion occurs. from the high concentration that will be in the alveoli. We've got lots of O2 here and very little O2 in the blood, so it diffuses across. Now you also, by having the capillaries go around the alveoli like this in a big curve, we are increasing the surface area for that to happen. Increased surface area. Okay, so there's a big long curve rather than one single point. If you imagine if the alveoli came in like this and the blood vessel was like that, you've just got one point for diffusion, and so it would be relatively low. So that doesn't happen. The blood vessel comes round, giving you a bigger surface area. And what this helps also to do is maintain the concentration gradient. Okay, so we keep that diffusion gradient going. And that comes on to this next question. List 3 features of gas exchange in animals, such as human surfaces. So 3 features of the surfaces. So we have a large surface area because of what I just highlighted, is that it curves round the alveoli rather than being a single point. Question 2, part 2 would be you've only got one cell thick, yeah, so it only has to go through, or two epithelial cells actually. Thin diffusion or distance, let's put narrow distance, or we could say thin single cells. Okay, and that's going to keep the diffusion high because it doesn't have to go so far. And then the last one would be to say moist. Okay, so diffusion can occur through a liquid, because obviously if there's a dry surface, if it's a solid, diffusion can't happen. Okay, so those are your 3 for that question. Moving on. B, at high altitudes there is less oxygen in the air than at sea level. Suggest how this might affect the uptake of oxygen in the alveoli. Well, there is less oxygen, so there is less O2 in the alveoli, so diffusion is slower because that concentration gradient we keep going on about, because the gradient is less steep. Let's make the concentration gradient is less steep. Okay, essentially if you had high concentration of O2 and the graph, your gradient diffusion happens like this. Now if you already start with a low O2, the gradient is like that, so diffusion is a lot slower, just to kind of give you a graphical analysis of it. So there's less O2 to start in the alveoli, so since there's less O2, the diffusion is going to be slower because the concentration is less steep. The analogy to it is, imagine a temperature difference. So if you have a hot cup of soup on a cold day, it's going to cool down much quicker. There's a much quicker diffusion of dissipation of the energy. Whereas if you had just a warm cup, it's going to lose its temperature. It's not going to lose its temperature as quickly because the temperature difference isn't so big. Okay, so the bigger the difference, the quicker it will happen. Part B, In the past, some athletes have cheated by injecting themselves with extra red blood cells before a major competition. Predict how this increase in red blood cells might affect their performance. So, more red blood cells. Red blood cells increases ability to transport oxygen to muscles, and so more respiration can occur, and therefore they'd have more energy. Draw a table to compare the composition of inhaled and exhaled air. So that should look something like this. Nitrogen, we've got about 70%, and it's going to stay the same. Oxygen is about 21%, and it will go down to 16 to 18%. Carbon dioxide is about 0.4%, and that's going to go up to about 4%. Water varies depending on if you're a humid climate or a very dry climate, and that generally speaking goes up to about 100%. It's relatively humid air. You can tell that when you breathe out on a cold day, you'll see condensation. And give reasons. Nitrogen isn't used by the body. In chemistry we say it's inert. Oxygen is used in respiration, so that's why it's decreased. Carbon dioxide produced in respiration, so it increases. Water, it is produced in respiration, so it increases. It's also because the lining of the lungs is moist, so some water vapor will just diffuse naturally into the air. And just to clarify, C6H12O6 plus 6O2 goes to form 6H2O plus 6CO2. So that gas is being used, this is being produced along with the water as well. Okay. Next up, the rib. B is the external, because it's on the outside. External intercostal muscle, and C is the diaphragm, and this is in breathing in, so the ribs move up and out to increase the volume and decrease the pressure, so air gets sucked in. The external intercostal muscles, these contract and pull rib cage up and out, and the diaphragm contracts, increases volume of thorax, and then the final answer, diaphragm contracts to increase the volume of the thorax. Thank you, bye.